So let's say the level's high, 6, 7, 8, whatever, or someone decides to mitigate. So what is the mitigation system? What is radon mitigation? That's obviously where we're going with next.
Sure.
What is mitigation? How's it installed? And yeah.
Yeah.
So being passive and active was another question I was going to have too. So
well, okay, let's start with passive versus active. We'll start with that because everything I'm going to talk about then is going to be related to an active mitigation system. Okay. So a passive mitigation system is most commonly used in new construction these days, and has been kind of the norm for a few years now. But a passive system is typically a vent going beneath the basement slab, ideally tied into the drainage tile, okay? And then a 3-inch pipe will be run up and vented out the attic just like your plumbing vent stacks, okay? And what you're relying on there is the airflow outside going across and pulling that air and creating a draft, right? And hoping that you can pull the radon gases to that particular pipe and vent them up and get rid of the gases. Passive systems are just that. They're passive, so sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Very, very hard to measure how they're working. I mean, the standard testing applies to radon, but a lot of people have the misnomer that I have a passive system, we're good. We've worked on a lot of passive systems that, quite frankly, are not keeping the numbers down. So that passive system, to make it active, it's already vented. The piping is into the drain tile, that air tube we're looking for. So all we do as mitigators in that instance is typically we'll find that 3-inch pipe, we'll go up in the attic, we'll cut in a radon fan and get power to it. And now all we're doing, instead of hoping the radon gases get to that pipe and get exhausted, we're putting a fan on that same pipe 24/7, and we're pulling the radon gases from the sub-slab environment, the drain tile environment, and getting them vented out the top. And then Mother Nature just scrubs them out. She's the best air scrubber out there, so she takes care of them from there. In the event that the home doesn't have an active or a passive system, and we go into a brand new home or a home that doesn't have that, so no mitigation whatsoever, there's basically two common means. You're going to have a drain tile depressurization system and a sub-slab depressurization. So the drain tile depressurization, if the home has drainage tile to a sump pit, is the most common in our area. If we have that, we are going to seal that sump pit off and put our vent pipe and active system off that drain tile environment. As I explained to my customers, that's basically a big straw going around the whole footprint of the house and oftentimes through the interior footprint of the house below the slab. And all that air is giving me the ability to draw through the rock and the sub-slab membrane and pull all the radon gases that want to come up into the house. We can pull them where we want them to go through that big straw and then get them out. So that's a very simple means of mitigation, very straightforward.
Is that the one I see when it's in a sump pump and they put a plexiglass over the sump pump?
Yep. So we put the plexi over the sump and sometimes, so that's the most common means to do it. Now, if we don't have a sump, or let's say it's an older home and we don't have any drain tile, we have to go into a process called sub-slab depressurization, where we're actually going to core drill through the slab and dig up some of the sub-slab membrane to create a little pocket. And then we're going to put the pipe into that, seal it back up, put a fan on it, and pull the gases out that way. So we're just going to pipe directly underneath the slab. Those become a little bit more in depth because we can't just put one hole in the slab randomly and know that we're covering that whole footprint. The drain tile, we know where it's going and how it's designed. So in older homes, they don't have the good rock base like new construction code calls for. We may be just going right into soil or clay, sand. So we go through a series of testing before we drill that first hole that's called pressure field extension testing. I should have I'm not an artist, so you wouldn't want me to draw anything anyway, but we'll go around maybe the footprint of the basement and we'll drill very small test ports And we'll run some tests that will tell us if we can move air from one corner to another corner, if they'll communicate. So we'll kind of do some preliminary stuff like that. So hopefully we can use as few bores as we need in that house. But those can be a little bit more detailed or in-depth versus a standard drain tile. But
this was cost is different than, I mean, obviously you can't give a general quote, but that's why one would vary, is like the one with the sump pump is going to be less expensive. The one with the passive system already in is probably the cheapest because it's already piped.
Yep.
Next most expensive would be if it's got a sump pump, and then if it doesn't, then that's going to be the most expensive.
Yeah. So if you were tiering them that way, you'd have your activation, basically your fan cut in on a passive system. The next level would be a drain tile depressurization, and then price is going to be dependent on, is it an all finished basement and you have no way out? Like, because we're not going to put a fan on the front of your house, even if you ask us to. We're not going to do that. So that consideration can affect price a little bit, but it's minimal. Then the next step to price would be a sub-slab depressurization with the pressure field extension testing. And then beyond that, you're going to add in crawl space work.
Yeah,
so
that's expensive, right?
If you get into crawl space work, we've got to encapsulate with a polymembrane, seal that to the walls. We always recommend spray foam because of the insulation value and comfort value above the crawl space then. And then we're putting in a pipe system below that, still need a fan, oftentimes tiling into or connecting into tiles. So sometimes, a lot of times with crawl spaces, you're going to have a drain tile depressurization and crawl space work, or a sub slab with crawl space. So it's usually you're kind of doing two things there. So that's where the price again.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the test goes on the lowest livable level, right? So you would test in the crawl space, but if the main level was high, obviously it's coming from the crawl space.
It could be, and again, it depends on the type of crawl space. So as a real estate agent, you're educating your buyer and you look in a crawl space and it's all concrete. That's a very good sign that the crawl space might not have to be mitigated, right? Sealed up and all of that. You look in there and you see a dirt floor crawl space. Let's get this tested. You know, I always recommend, we've unfortunately ran into, from a testing side, Collin, kind of on a side note, when you're representing buyers, I always recommend testing for radon. Unless they literally have no concern and wouldn't want to address it anyway. But if there's any level of concern, even if there's a system that's up and running and looks like it's running properly, we've actually run into only one, thankfully, in the Ames market, but there was a completely improperly installed mitigation system that had never worked and looked like it was working. The YouTube read well, that the fan was getting enough air. But the way it was designed, it was pulling air from an interior block wall, not sub-slab. And that new homeowner bought the home, decided to test because we had been in doing some HVAC work and talked to her about radon. And she goes, yeah, I'm curious. We tested and her levels came in at like 10. And she's like, I've got a working system. And so then we had to kind of dig into what was going on. Ended up, she had to pay for a whole new system. So obviously she was frustrated with her agent, who really did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, did nothing wrong, but immediately like, how does this happen? So
that's
I always recommend.
So what you said there, because I get that question all the time, is like, do I need to get a test? And there's already a system installed. No, you don't need to get a test. Especially even sometimes the inspector will say, yeah, I mean, because the YouTube is like the red and it needs to be uneven, right? That means it's pulling.
Yep.
And so it can even read reading that it's working. Yeah.
Yeah.
That means it's not working if it's level, right? If
it's level, yeah. So when it's level, that means it's not working. And it could not be working. All this indicates actually is if the fan is running and moving air. Okay. So it doesn't tell you the radon levels. But when this thing goes up, so I don't know how well you can see it, but the most common fans used in radon, when it would be offset, would read max pressure at 1.8 inches of water column. Okay. So let's say that you go in and see this fan operating at 1.8, and somebody could say, hey, it's working. Look at that YouTube. It's offset. Everything looks good. Well, I know as a professional that that fan is struggling to find air at 1.8. Okay, so it sounds like it's working good, but it may not be getting enough air. So especially on a sub-slab depressurization, it might just be sucking on soil and can't find air anywhere.
Oh.
So it sounds like it's working, it looks like it's installed right, but it may not be doing the job because it can't reach far enough across that slab to effectively remove the gases. Okay, so that's why the EPA recommends testing every 2 years, even if you have an active system. So my recommendation, just to cover your basis, would be ask the seller, have you ever tested? No, we haven't ever tested. Okay, but we have a system. We had a system when we bought it. I would test. If the seller says, I tested a year ago, just ask for a copy of that test, right? And maybe that's enough.
Yeah.
But, I mean, testing's very, run 100, 125 bucks. The peace of mind that can be provided by that, or the frustration control if the number did test high and you thought you had a system, is probably well worth that money.